Good afternoon. I'm John Kelly with the Starbucks Coffee Company from the other Washington, D.C. A quick thank you and a request before I introduce our distinguished panel. 3 years ago, like most of corporate America, Starbucks simply did not get it. For a company whose mission is to literally nurture humanity one cup at a time, we were not considered vet-ready. But thanks to the passionate leadership of some of our employees, they challenged our senior leadership team, and with the help of Secretary Bob Gates on our board, quickly turned things around with some great aspirations. We set out to hire over a 5-year period 10,000 veterans. Not only veterans, but we decided to do something that we thought was sort of Starbucky, as we say, but also something very important, that the spouse serves as well. And so we set out to hire 10,000 veterans and military spouses. And we did not out of a sense of obligation or charity. We were instructed to do it because they were good for business and they add value, much of what you've heard from other employers here who have done things well. And because we were new to this, we depended so much on so many of you in this room, especially hiring our heroes, who was a great partner to begin with, the USO, RP6, Rubicon, Mission Continues, Team Red, White, and Blue, our partners at the Schultz Family Foundation. We could not have done this without you. We could not have done it with the Department of Defense, Generals Dahl, Lanza, Brown, people like Pete Corelli, retired, who coached us along the way. But these generals opened the gates of places like Joint Base Lewis McChord, invited us on to learn and to get immersed in a culture we did not know. And the results has been extraordinary. Rather than taking 5 years, it took us 3 years to meet that goal of 10,000. And like Hilton and others, we decided that, we're going to more than double that now, closer to 25,000, which we're really proud of. But it's never really been about the number. For us, culture is everything. And what we think we have the opportunity, and this is where the request comes, is that we need your help again. Because we think we have the opportunity in more than 14,000 locations across in every neighborhood in the United States, with more than 90 million people coming through our doors every week and 150,000 young people working in our stores who are now side by side with veterans and military spouses. We have the opportunity to do something that General Pace mentioned. And we also do not call it the civ-mil divide. We call it a gap, an understanding gap. And we all know the studies that as much progress as we've made in gratitude, we do know that our veterans and military spouses still feel not underappreciated, but not fully understood. We think Starbucks has an opportunity to use our footprint to change that. And we're going to do that by opening more than 100 military family stores over the next 5 years. We're going to expand our Adopt a Unit program, where we're having civilian partners sending great packages to the forward operating bases and other places that could use a good cup of coffee. And we're doing Military Mondays, which is where we welcome in VSOs to use our space to meet with transitioning veterans and help them on their way. That third place, we want that to be the place for 2.5 million transitioning veterans and their families to be welcome. That cultural piece is something that we think is our opportunity, but again, we need help. Because the last piece of this is that we want to lean into the stigma, the misperceptions around PTS. This is something that we intentionally did not do when we first started. We left that to others. But we have heard from our partners that it's time for us to do more and that we can step up, because what we've also learned is something you all know, but the reality is the rest of America does not know that the occurrence of PTS exists at the same percentage in the civilian world as it does in the military world. We want to change that perception. We think it's key. When we're hiring opportunity youth from inner cities who have suffered extraordinary violence growing up in a violent situation, or refugees who are escaping violence, we see it. We know that this is happening, and we want to talk about it, but we're not experts. So the request is to help us use our scale for good, help us build on our success that you are so much a part of, and help us close this gap of understanding once and for all and turn gratitude into full understanding. It's so critical for the future of the country. And lastly, I just want to relate to comments that President Bush made last night, which touches on so much of what we think we need to do and what our opportunity is. He kind of touched on that great intangible, which is when he's around veterans, it makes him a better person. That's happening today because of our hiring and our honoring commitment. And we think if we can help close this gap of understanding, millions and millions of Americans who walk into a Starbucks and see that patriotic apron, that it identifies a veteran or a military spouse, they are also going to feel better. And we want to bring that to scale. So thank you very much for your partnership. We ask you for your continued support. And I want to thank again Colonel Howe for this extraordinary event. We're so proud to be a part of it and to partner with Politico to help bring this to more audiences. And lastly, let me introduce our very distinguished panel. So if you'll come in, we're led by moderators Bryan Bender and Kimberly Heckley, as well as Senators Boozman from Arkansas and Congressman Walz from Minnesota. Please welcome the panel. Thank you.
Well, thanks again, everybody. You know, I think we've had a great day so far. I think you would all agree. Thanks again to everyone who's here and for what you do. You know, we've heard a lot of discussion today about education for veterans. We've heard a lot of talk about what are the different enablers that help them transition into civilian life. And, you know, we've heard from veterans, we've heard from leaders in the community, many of you in the audience. I think we're very pleased now to have two members of Congress, one from each party, Senator Boozman and Congressman Walz, who have a huge role in guiding the conversation in the United States about how we take care of our veterans going forward, and clearly have a very big role in writing the laws that encourage a lot of the innovative ideas that we've talked about today. I also want to introduce my co-moderator, Kim Helfing, is senior education writer at Politico. But before that, she spent a long time covering the VA for the Associated Press. She was also embedded with the 101st Airborne Division in both Iraq and Afghanistan. I think there's a few guys here from there, maybe gals too. Kim, why don't you kick it off and let's get the conversation going.
Thanks, Brian. We do have a fantastic panel ahead, and looking forward to the discussion and hearing from these two lawmakers. We have Senator John Boozman. He is a Republican from Arkansas who's on the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee. We have Congressman Tim Walz. He's the ranking Democrat on the House Veterans Affairs Committee. But before we get started, just a quick reminder that you can join the conversation on Twitter at #Stand2, and we will be checking your questions on stage. So this is your chance, so fire away. But just to get started, we'd like to talk a little bit about the GI Bill. Obviously, it's a tremendous benefit. It's paid out more than $70 billion to Iraq and Afghanistan veterans and their families. About 40% of the funding overall has gone to for-profit colleges. The collapse, and they are popular with many veterans because of the career offerings available and the online component, but the collapse in recent years of ITT and Corinthian kind of left several veterans going to these schools in a lurch. One of the reasons is that they didn't have a degree, but yet their GI Bill benefit could not be reset. I'd love to hear you two comment on what you think should be done to help veterans in this position, and also whether or not there's more that Congress and the VA should be doing to prevent this situation in the first place. Senator, would you like to go first? Or?
No, sure. First of all, thank all of the sponsors. Thank all of you for working so hard to put this together. It's so very important that we talk about all of the different components of taking care of veterans. And my dad did 20 some odd years. In fact, Tim and I served together in the House. I was over there for 9 years. And I tell people, he's a sergeant major. My dad retired as a master sergeant in the Air Force. He reminds me a lot of my dad. You know, I'm always afraid he's going to have me do this or do that or whatever. So, but anyway, that's a problem, you know, with the situation that we have, you know, with these, that leaves veterans in the lurch. We're just going to have to work together, figure it out, and we can do that. And I don't know exactly what the answer is right now. The other problem that we've got along that line is that we have veterans that are in a situation where they have the short courses, perhaps certificate courses and IT and things that would be of great benefit. GI Bill doesn't cover those. And so we're working hard to make sure there's coverage there. But we can be very, very proud of the GI Bill. That is a tremendous, positive situation. Tim was a big part of that in the House. We worked very hard at that and actually in the implementation. But this is another part of the implementation, is figuring out, the situation that you brought up, and there's several others in the same category.
Well, yeah, thank you, and thank you all, and to the Bush Institute for hosting this, and to my good friend, Senator Boozman. He, quite honestly, as we served together and as a young member coming in, he was already on the committee, a great role model for how you respect one another, how you debate vigorously, and how you come to some compromise. GI Bill, obviously for me personally, I'm used the GI Bill. I would not have gone to college without it. My father was Korean War era veteran, and the same thing. I think in answer to your question, the real key runs deeper than that. The GI Bill is certainly a model, and as John said, there's got to be other ways to use it. I think the crux of that problem where we ran into with the for-profits was the lack of a focused transition, a seamless transition. And I admire and applaud the services over the last probably decade for changing that. After my final deployment, I remember the deployment was a couple days of coming back off. We got back home, and the chaplain spoke to us a little bit, and they showed us the horse whisperer, and my troops said, Sergeant Major, what's the lesson we're supposed to learn? I said, I'm not certain. I said, just be good when you go home, type of thing is what it, and that was the transition. And in all fairness, we just wanted to get out of there. I think now what you're seeing is a concerted 12 to 18-month effort that we have DOD and VA seamlessly communicating, just a simple thing of the VA health records that the Secretary announced, but also in this transition period. And we worked together, and when John was in the House, we started this idea of making sure state certifications, whether you were an 88 mic so you could drive trucks, or getting our private employers like the Mayo Clinic. Now, if you go search their website for jobs, you can put in your MOS and it will spit out the jobs that are available there. I think that alleviates some of the waste, because you can't blame these 22, 23-year-olds. They do a tour, they come out, they want to use their GI Bill, and they get sold kind of a bill of goods. But those for-profits, some of them are actually providing a great service, and veterans like them because of the flexibility.
And just one other thing regarding, well, Transition Assistance Program, which Tim touched on, is so very important. When we were young members in the House, not doing a whole lot in that area, we made it such that it became mandatory, and it's just night and day now compared to it is. So that's another way I think that we can. So many times, the only time you heard about benefits or this or that was when you were recruited, and then you transitioned out and you didn't have a good idea of what was going on. But we've worked really hard to improve that. Still need for further improvement, but it's much better than ever before.
A quick follow-up, and I know you guys don't believe in yes or no answers, but I'm going to try. Talking about expanding the GI Bill, there's also been some concern, growing concern among some veterans groups that there is not insignificant group of veterans, for example, who were awarded the Purple Heart, but are not eligible for the GI Bill because they did not serve 36 full months. Yes or no? Should we expand the GI Bill so it covers those guys?
Yes.
Miguel?
Yes.
Perfect.
And there's some other, you might touch on like reservists that are in a situation where they're medically
Yeah, and it falls into this same category where we have the bill on this. There's also something, the authority to be able to use in these contingency operations, 12304B authority under Title 10. I know we've got folks here who live in the weeds. My Guard unit from my hometown in Mankato, Minnesota just did a mission in the Sinai, but because of the authority that they were mobilized under, they're precluded receiving some benefits. Those are real corrosive to morale, and I also think where we have a one force now, reserve component and the active force, we need to make sure that's there. Again, these are not lottery wins like the GI Bill. We have a responsibility to administer taxpayer dollars smartly, but we also have to make sure that the benefit we get from them equals the money we're putting in, but that those veterans have that flexibility.
So you're right. It's hard to get a yes or no, but very definitely yes. And then we have other then we have other situations along that, the same type of situations that we're trying to get straight also.
Well, let's talk a little bit. Kim and I were talking earlier about other gaps, perhaps, in the system in dealing with unique veterans' problems.
About 10 years ago when I was covering the VA, it was a time in which the VA hospitals a lot of times are looking at ways to add privacy components to the hospital rooms to lock the doors because more female veterans were coming into the hospitals. A lot of the hospitals were just by sheer number were trying to address some of the issues involving women. They were putting in women's clinics. What are some of the gaps that are still existing today, 10 years later, in terms of providing care for women veterans? It's my understanding about 20% of new recruits in the military today are women.
Well, yeah, and one of the issues we have is in reproductive rights, and this issue comes up of where we have what happens with veterans when they're coming in to see gynecological care, which many of the facilities aren't set up for. We have made strides, but it goes back to the point, and I know we don't really have enough time to get into this. I was saying out in our conversation prior to this is a transformational time, and I believe this is a once-in-a-generation time to form the VA that we think it's going to look like. This is that skating to where the puck's going to be, not to where it is. You're absolutely right. We've changed some of those basic things. There's a great example in Phoenix, which was the heart of a lot of this scandal, but the Phoenix Women's VA Clinic has same-day scheduling, same-day mammograms, same-day results for all veterans that need to go in with that. We are making great progress, but I don't think we are still taking the long-term care. We don't have a large population of elderly female veterans, which is going to be part of its own specialty care. We have to start thinking how we're going to deliver that.
We have to do a much, much, much better job of dealing with female veterans. The numbers, as you point out, are really outstanding in the sense that, most people don't understand the number of female veterans that we have. But the VA was set up as a men's-oriented system. And so, in fact, myself and other Republicans, other Democrats joined together, introduced a bill again to attack this. But one of the ladies, I remember at the press conference, one of the ladies that was there that had served said it was not uncommon at all for her to be in her VA hospital. Somebody would come up to her and ask her if she was looking for her husband. And that's kind of the attitude that's still out there. And again, it's the way it is. We're working very hard to change that culture. We can do that legislatively. I know Dr. Shulkin is also working very hard to change the culture in the sense of at the individual components that we have right now. So it's something that we've got a long ways to go, and we need to roll up our sleeves and just get it done.
I'm going to take another shot at the yes or no. To the Congressman's point about following or looking where the hockey puck is going as opposed to where it is, post 9/11 families have the benefit that caregivers get some government benefit and government subsidy support. That is not true for other generations of veterans. Where do you guys sit on that? I mean, is that a good idea to expand that, to include caregivers across the veterans community? And then maybe it's not a yes or no question. How do we pay for that? Because all of these things we're talking about potentially cost more money.
I think it can be a yes or no, and I favor doing that, but we have to work through it. And you look at the cost, and there is significant cost there. On the other hand, you look at the cost, and what that does is allow people to stay at their homes versus being institutionalized, which there's no comparison in the cost. And so you just have to weigh all these things out. The good news right now, you know, we're up here discussing it now. This discussion is going on at all levels in Congress, and then also I know it's something that Dr. Shulkin is concerned about and really trying to figure out a path forward so that we can start. I don't know that we can do everybody, all, you know, just overnight, but I do think that we can start down that path. Again, if you look at it long term, the sad thing is that government has a tendency to look very short term. You know, when you're looking at the dollars and cents. But if you look long term, I think that you could make a good argument that you're actually going to save some dollars by keeping more people at home, being well taken care for, as opposed to being institutionalized, where it costs so very much.
I'll say yes, agree with John on this, and I think the point he's making is is twofold. Is first, veterans are asking for this, and that's what we should try and deliver. And secondly, we're paying for it anyway in a more institutionalized setting where we could save. And I think it does get to the heart of this transformation we're talking about. That overly simplistic argument that it's government versus the private sector in caring for veterans. It's never been that way, and we have to come up with the model that is most veteran-centric, that delivers us the most for our taxpayer dollars. And I think when it comes to caregivers, the family wants to be there, the family should be there, and we all have a responsibility to help make sure if that spouse is leaving work or doing whatever they're doing, that there's a compensation for that, because we would pay for it anyway.
The other thing is that we need to do a better job even with the post 9/11 group. I was at the bill signing at the White House today that concerned doing a better job of holding people accountable. But there was a gentleman there who lost an arm and a leg. He said it took over 3 years to make it such that his home was retrofitted so that he could be there and you know, live in an efficient manner. That's simply unexcusable. The good news is that you know, we are working through those kind of they're not catch-22 things, they're just delays, the bureaucracy. But there's simply no excuse for that. So we're going to push really hard, not only in the other area, but also to make sure that those post 9/11 are actually getting the benefit that we intend for them to get.
Congressman, what was your response to the bill that was signed today?
I'm enthusiastically supportive of it, and I'm a high school government teacher, and it's that little thing, I'm just a bill sitting on Capitol Hill. This one actually worked that way. We debated it. It left the House. I didn't agree with the House version because I didn't think the protections were there to ensure that we had the qualified workforce and the constitutionally protected rights. It went over to the Senate. We continued to work on it. We brought it back. And there's no one's going to justify when somebody is not providing what they're supposed to do. The Secretary needs to have some of that flexibility. We need to make sure we're protecting whistleblowers, and we need to understand that that qualified workforce matters. So this was a great step forward. It also shows, as I said, it's not just hyperbole. The VA committee, because of our shared values, because of our shared constituency, still does try and find those things. So I think it was a tool that will help.
Senator, you obviously were at the signing, so you support it. I'm wondering if I could get you guys, since we're running out of time, I know you guys have to be somewhere. Veterans issues has enjoyed a level of bipartisanship, as we're seeing here today, for many years. But there are growing concerns that even this issue is at risk of falling into the morass, which so many other issues have gotten caught up in. How do we all who care about this issue, how do you, in your position in the legislative branch, ensure that it stays in that safe space, but also if you can give some voice to your concerns about some of those outside forces, including some new veterans groups that are very political on the left and the right, who are possibly putting that at risk?
I've spoken about this for years. I'm deeply worried about this because our Veterans Service Organization, we have a constituency that holds us accountable probably like no other committee, with the American Legion, the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, the VFW, the DAV. Those are 501c3s. There's some new animals on the block that are political organizations, and their job, and I've said this, I was in a committee on this very accountability bill that I was pushing through, and I disagreed with the one that was leaving our committee, saying at this point in time I can't support it, but I'm willing to work with you on. But I said the irony of this is, by the time I leave this room, there'll be attack ads running against me in a campaign. 15 minutes later, the ads were already running on that. Tim Walz does not want accountability. No, I just served for 24 years in the military and been on the committee for 10 years and have a bipartisan reputation for doing it, but because I disagreed with this, that came. That is a space, and again, it's fine to disagree on this, but those veteran service organizations are apolitical. They just want us to get it right, and because of their apolitical nature, they, I would argue, forced and reinforced our friendship and our commitments to getting it right. This is a new animal, and it's one that I think we should be deeply concerned about. I've just asked, just in full disclosure, because there are several of the major groups that do this, they're just extensions of the RNC and the DNC, and I would argue we should be protective of our space, our nonpartisan space.
Senator, can you talk to that, since there are other groups that maybe go after you?
No, well, there are for sure, and it's just the situation that we're living now, and really, have been for as long as politics have existed, but it is on steroids right now in the sense of being so very partisan. You'll have situations where, somebody will roll up a bunch of different bills that maybe your bill is part of it, and then other bills that you disagree with, and then, force of votes, you vote against it, and so then, you're accused of, not supporting your own bill, and it's just all of this crazy stuff. But I do think it's important that the veteran service organizations do their very best to stay non-political, because, truly we work very hard in a very nonpartisan way to push veterans issues forward. And I had the pleasure of serving in the House and now the Senate, and it is a refuge, in the sense of being in those meetings, and everybody's working, helping veterans push these things, and that's great. The reality, though, is that we can work hard if you don't have the grassroots, if you don't have the veteran service organizations getting out to their members, all of these different things, it simply doesn't work. I can remember, Tim, going into my dad passed away fairly young of prostate cancer, but I can remember going in, visiting, and always the Sergeant's magazine, was laying on the coffee table. He'd read that thing, So it is important, and getting the message out in a nonpartisan way is what it's all about.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We didn't even get to ask each of you about the choice issue. I don't know if you want to give it a
No, well, choice, the VA is changing, and that's a good thing. Certainly, there's no effort to dismantle the VA. I understand how important it is in the sense that when I visit with my veterans, they're very proud of the care that they're getting. We do have situations, at times, though, they simply can't get in, or they have to travel too far. And so we've come up with the choice program. We've come up with community health, and I think it's great. And so we're going to, work hard to provide the funding, make sure that it's there so that program can grow. Again, not with any effort to dismantle the VA. I'm an optometrist, an eye doctor by training, so if you want any free advice about your glasses or cataracts or whatever, I'll be glad to give that to you after this is over. But my profession, medicine, in so many different ways, the print, the broadcast medium, in the last 10 or 15 years, those professions have probably changed, along with almost every other profession, more in the last 10 or 15 years than since the profession began. And it's true of the VA, too, in the sense that we've got to make it such that we can deliver care efficiently, cost-effectively, and I think part of that is choice. We had problems in rolling it out. We weren't paying the providers. The wait list was all messed up and this and that, but Dr. Shulkin is working very hard with his team, with Congress, to make it such that we can get rid of those things. Again, not in any effort, though, to dismantle the VA.
No, and this is a fundamental issue. The VA, I've said this since I've been in Congress, DOD has a quadrennial defense review because our defense needs of the 1970s changed in the 1980s, changed in the 1990s. There was no such thing in the VA. And when we did choice, we asked some folks to step up provider networks in 90 days. Nobody could have done that. But what we were getting at is and I ask all of you in this room, don't allow the VA and the idea of veteran health care to be a proxy fight for government versus the private sector. It's a stupid, simplistic argument. The VA underpins and is a symbiotic relationship with our health care system in this country that cannot be divided. But if a veteran wants to get care closer to home and it can be delivered in that way, and there can be a continuity of care with the basic services of the VA, we should do that, and we can do that. This is an opportunity to break down some of that simple thinking, create that VA of the 21st century, to provide it for the veterans, and keep that core mission there. And I think it's a recipe for this. It's not, there's probably no solution that it's government or the private sector. It's both in the relationship that what needs to be done. So I support the choice program, want to make it work, just like John does. We support the VA and its core mission, just like John does. Now we need to make that work.
And electronic health records.
Will help.
Thank you very much.
Look at that. You get out of here like that.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Director of the Military Service Initiative at the George W. Bush Institute, Miguel Howe.
Well, I've been humbled by the opportunities that I've had over the past 4 years here at the Institute. It's just an incredible list, and I think to that I now have to add the humility of having extra time ceded to the Institute and to me by our friends on Capitol Hill up in Congress. So thanks to Senator Boozman and Congressman Walz on this very, very important and special day for us here in Stand To, but also for our nation's veterans, the White House and the Congress with today's VA accountability signing. Wow. Wow, what an incredible event. An event that's really the culmination, as you heard from our task force chairs, of 6 months of work, but really the culmination of all of your work over the past several years. And so this convening at a critical inflection point with a recent change in administrations was really in many ways a first of its kind, extraordinary really, bringing together, as we just heard and earlier today, senior government officials with leaders from business, higher education, philanthropy, and nonprofits to address key priorities and to lay out a framework for a way forward to improve outcomes for veteran transition in 3 critical areas: health and well-being, employment, and education. And so we are grateful to each of you here today, our partners, steering committee members, sponsors, task force members, everyone here and everyone listening and watching out on the live stream, #StandTo. And so we've packed a great deal of important work into those 2 days. And just today we've heard Secretary Shulkin say, we are changing the focus of health care at the VA from acute care to one of well-being that includes employment and continued purpose, and that we should be incentivizing health and well-being and enhancing outcomes. We heard Mrs. Bush say, today we're here to foster a successful transition, and we need to ensure that families and caregivers have that same access to transition services. Bill Roush and his panel told us that we must set conditions so that veterans and their families can thrive with the focus on physical health, mental and emotional health, community connections and relationships, and purpose and identity that is on par and integrated with education and employment opportunities. Of course, from our 3 chancellors and university presidents, we heard them say that higher education institutions must drive change by prioritizing this issue at the top of higher ed's leadership and emphasizing data collection, best practices, research, and convenings. We heard Melissa Sterling say that Hilton has reaped the rewards of veteran employees so much that they've doubled down on their investment, and that veterans are promoted at a higher rate than non-veterans. But Dan and Courtney cautioned that in order to set up for that success, it's all about the integration, the onboarding, mentorship, coaching that is essential from these or our businesses to leverage this critical resource. We also heard something that I think is competing for the quote of the day on our Twitter feed, two competitions. So Dan, you're in the running with "No one's going to die here today." And then, of course, Mike Rodriguez with "My daddy is hard to kill." And so we heard from General Pace that there is an onus upon our veterans. We must take responsibility and ownership for our transition. But now we've been at this long enough that there's time to make some adjustments in our dialogue, in our vernacular, the vocabulary that we use. And so none of our wounded warriors have lost anything. They have sacrificed for our nation. And this thing that we've been calling as a divide, that 71% of those who have not served don't understand those that have, is not a divide. It's an understanding. It's an understanding that our veterans and those of us misunderstanding, that those of us that work in this space and our veterans can resolve and close. And so, of course, we just heard from our friends on the Hill, from Congressman Walz, that this is a once-in-a-generation point in time to reform our VA. The VA, who, as we heard from Secretary Shulkin, has embraced working with all of you here in this room, as have our other agency partners. And from Senator Boozman, we need to focus on our women veterans. They have not gotten the attention and the support that they need. And so, of course, we kicked off the day hearing from our veterans Rod, Fontaine, and Flo, who embody all of those who have worn the uniform and who demonstrate through their life, their actions, and what we heard this morning, why, as President Bush said himself, if you can't get a sense of the national assets our veterans are, you are just not listening. And so because of that, we must find what works and focus on results. And so while these 2 days and the work that's led to it have been quite extraordinary, a convening that does not lead to action is, as we used to say in my old unit, a bit like a self-licking ice cream cone. And so now it's time to focus on that action and those next steps. We began yesterday with clear goals, establish a framework, and address key cross-sector priorities and next steps to improve veteran transition outcomes, to synchronize that effort across sectors and within issue areas, and so that we can empower every veteran and his or her family to lead a full and meaningful life by achieving optimal health and well-being and leveraging meaningful education and employment opportunities. I tell you with great confidence and certainty that we are on the right track. We hear it on the buzz, in the conversations, in the sidebars last night and today. And together we can achieve these important goals. And to get there, each of us have a role to play. And to get there, each of us must collectively work. The Stand To partners, the task force members, those attending and participating today, we must all commit. We must commit first to a common framework that specifies a successful veteran transition includes just that, achieving optimal health and well-being and leveraging meaningful education and employment opportunities. But we must all commit to integrate employment, education, and health and well-being and work to establish measurable objectives for each of those. We must establish systems to improve data collection, sharing, and analysis. Clearly, a theme that we heard in the work throughout each task force and every panel that was up here today. You know, without that measurement, there's no accountability for outcomes, and we can't have effective stewardship of our resources. If we can't measure and assess, how do we know that our efforts are working? How do we know that needs are being met in the right way and that resources are being maximized? We also know these issues are too large and too complex, and as we have heard repeatedly, we must all recommit to enhanced public-private partnerships. And so we've had great dialogue with our government partners. And we have recommended that they can help us in this effort by establishing an office in the White House for veterans and military families, by modernizing VA and DoD healthcare systems through enhanced public-private partnerships, realigned authorities and regulations, improved policies, and expanded outreach efforts. And I think we heard a commitment to that from the Secretary and from Congress today. To ensure long-term viability of the post-9/11 GI Bill, and to improve pre-transition activities and veteran readiness by expanding apprenticeships, fellowships, internships, and identify opportunities to customize the TAP program. But it's all of us. And so our businesses, as we just recently heard, must commit and take action to codify a new era in veteran and military spouse employment by improving corporate recruiting and hiring, onboarding and integration, and in retention. The Veteran Employment Task Force has taken the lead and can facilitate this next phase of effort, and they've published the results of those findings, which you can find on our website. Leaders of higher education must foster a national effort for veteran recruiting, admissions, on-campus interaction, education success, and career placement. The Education Task Force, as we heard, stands ready to begin this effort and bring that community together. Healthcare providers, nonprofits, and community organizations, all working to advance that health and well-being, must improve and streamline service delivery and improve integration and coordination of effort across all sectors, from the national to the community level. These priorities must be driven by the leaders who have been in this room, and so we must challenge each other to not only commit to this framework and these priorities, but to commit to the continued work begun by these task force and you, the participants of Stand 2. By doing so, we will shape and drive legislation, policy, resourcing, programming, messaging, research, data evaluation, and accountability that will foster veteran outcomes. You can find the tools and the resources developed by the task forces in support of this work at bushcenter.org. All of the task forces have resources and products that will support all of us there today. In the coming weeks, we will add the full outcomes, recommendations, and next steps from the task forces to that resource page. We also encourage you to leverage the host of resources that we at the Bush Center have developed in support of these efforts. You heard earlier from the President and Eric about the Veteran Employment Transition Roadmap, and we encourage everyone to leverage and use that tool. You will also find additional information about the Warrior Wellness Alliance. You heard both the President tee that up and Jack Hammond talked about it, but that is the Bush Institute's contribution to achieving optimal health and well-being by addressing the invisible wounds of war. And so we have brought together many of our key partners, of whom are in the room. As we have heard throughout the course of the last few days, there is nothing more important than the power of peer referrals. And so we have created an alliance, a network of networks, as it were. Some of the largest and most respected peer-based veteran organizations, and we are growing, but inclusive of Student Veterans of America, Team Red, White, and Blue, Student Veterans of America, Team Rubicon, Mission Continues, Wounded Warrior Project, and our own Team 43. On the other side, the networks of the best public, private, nonprofit providers for invisible wound care, to include members of the Cone Veteran Network, the Warrior Care Network, Tri-West Health, and soon to be announced additional partners. And so we have learned, we know, we've talked about today that one of the imperatives for addressing those invisible wounds is to first and foremost connect those that need care to care. And so that is how this alliance will work, followed thereupon by improving the quality and the reach of that care. We must foster continued investment in research on these issues and raise appropriate level of awareness and understanding. And then finally, of course, be on the lookout for the new Veteran Leadership Program that was announced by President Bush today. Thank you all for your service and commitment to all of this work. By fostering a successful transition, you not only ensure a meaningful quality of life for our veterans, their families, and caregivers, you ensure we leverage a national cadre of committed leaders who will serve in new ways and with new purpose. Thanks. Have a great weekend.